We have talked about the Virginia gubernatorial election results quite a bit. Russell, you put out a fun and pretty vulgar article. Actually, that was as I was reading that, I'm like, man, you're really not pulling any punches with this one that we just put out this morning about why the Democrats lost and why you think the 2022 is going to be even worse. And so, we're not going to beat this topic to death here, but there are some exit polls that I do think are quite interesting and probably worth going over. All right. So these exit polls are pretty fascinating, especially since, the excuse given on like MSNBC and even to a lesser extent, but to a certain extent on CNN had to do with, typical, this is basically a white lash is basically what Joy-Ann Reid had to say about it. I watched some of the clips that you linked to in your article. And so I'm going to read some of these out loud just because we do put all of these shows on the audio podcast as well. Men went for Youngkin 55-44. Women went for McCullough 53-46. Nothing too surprising there. Glenn Youngkin actually won the Latino vote in Virginia, 55-44. This is the thing that got the most coverage in here. I don't know if you could see my cursor, but there it is, Hispanic or Latino, only 5% of the vote. But, that 5% there, the fact that was not a 65-35 split for the Democrats, as it figures to be most times, that alone really was a big difference maker. One thing that has not gotten much press is the fact that
Youngkin won that group.
Oh, he did. He won 55-44. Right. That's what I mean. He won that outright. The thing that has gotten less press than that, but I think is equally significant, and if you're just looking at exit polls for the first time, or you're not as familiar with the way these demographics typically break down, this might not be as noticeable. But the fact that Youngkin got 13% of the black vote is actually quite significant. And, if you're not used to looking at these kinds of polls, you might think, well, McCullough did his job there, got 86% of the black vote. No. Democrats are supposed to get at least minimum 90% of the African-American vote. If Republicans crack double digits in the black vote, that typically spells doom for Democrats, and it did. I think a major development here is the fact that Youngkin did as well as he did with young people. Ages 18 to 29, McCullough 54, Youngkin 45. I mean, when does a Republican get 45% of the vote with the 18 to 29 demo? So you had, massive underperformance by McCullough in so many of these key demographics that are traditionally heavily Democratic, not just the Hispanic vote. That's the one that's jumped out at people because he actually lost that block outright. But the Hispanic vote in Virginia is pretty small. Like this poll says, it was only 5% of the actual vote. But ages 18 to 29, 13% of the vote. Blacks, 17% of the vote. Pretty significant, and he underperformed big time there. Democrats are supposed to get, like I said, 90 is even bad. You're supposed to get between 92 and 95, really. And he was down at 86.
Well, I think when you look at this as a whole, and when you get into, I know you're not there yet with the college degrees, it's basically the Democrats managed to alienate everybody. That's what you really see here. I am sure with a lot of these groups, including the Latino group, and I'm sorry they don't have Asians here because there's been a lot of, I haven't been able to find stats, a lot of anecdotal information.
Well, there is an other group there, if you notice. I don't know if you noticed that, but under Hispanic and Latino, there's other, which is 6%, and the Asians are probably
they
have to be figured into there.
I would like to see it specifically, though, because a lot of people who have reported on what happened in Virginia have talked specifically about how there were a lot of Asian immigrants in Northern Virginia who specifically immigrated there for the school system, who were really pissed off about a lot of the controversies that have been erupting there over the last few years.
Well, the Asian
And
vote
that a
typically
lot of them
skews
who had
pretty
been,
heavily Democrat also. It's
and they
not
were
as heavy as
saying a
African
lot of them
American, but it's like
flipped.
60-40. Right. Yeah.
And
And this looks here, McAuliffe barely eked out a win in that demo.
right. So there's that. There's, as we were discussing the other day, what did you think suburban Republicans were with you now? They don't like you. They never liked you. They just didn't like Trump more. Why would you have thought that these people were going to permanently become Democrats? For what reason? They're rich Republicans in the suburbs. Like, why would they all of a sudden become Democrats? What did you think? All of a sudden they're big proponents of unions and Medicare for all. Like what did you think? And culturally, you knew they weren't with you. So like, why would you have thought they're going to become Democrats now? So that was just a stupid thing to hitch their wagon to begin with, the whole suburban vote. And yeah, on the culture war issues, we talked about this in our post-election coverage too. Have they ever spoken to working class people of color? Like, they're not with the gender neutral bathrooms as a rule. They are not with the critical race theory as a rule. And as I said in my article, because that'll set off alarm bells, because you have Nicole Wallace comparing critical race theory to believing in ghosts. Does she understand there are entire books about critical race theory, like college departments dedicated to critical race theory? Like, how do you go on TV and say something like that? Like, I was actually, when I watched that, I was like, is she that ignorant? Because it almost seemed like that's what she actually believes. Like, does Nicole Wallace not know there? I mean, because she's coming out of Republican land, she's like a convert. So maybe she just doesn't actually know that it's a thing.
Look, I mean, I think a lot of these MSNBC people just get paid to toe a certain line, and that's it.
Sure,
I don't think they check under the hood too carefully, if you know what I mean.
Yes, but it's such a stupid thing to say, and she puts such emphasis on it that, I mean, nobody wants to just come off as a
because look,
moron.
I mean, what they're trying to.
I was like, does she not know that there's such a thing?
All right. Well,
like,
here, let me just
did she hear from some liberal that there's no such thing and she just believed it?
Let me just read some of these stats off here, just so I could take this off the screen. Men with a college degree, Youngkin 55 to 45. Men without a college degree, this is where the Democrats really get killed. And this is really, I mean, this has always been the case, but it's especially been the case since Trump came along. Men without a college degree, 69% for Youngkin. Women without a college degree, this is really, I think, the major deciding factor here. Women without a college degree, 68-31. And we could talk about MSNBC, we could talk about all of these sort of media institutions, but what it really, I mean, the major determinative factor here is who believes in the system and who doesn't, right? People without a college degree tend to be very skeptical of the system. They tend to be very skeptical of the idea that it really matters intrinsically what their children are, quote unquote, learning in school, right? They don't really they don't really buy that there's much like intrinsic value, much on its face value to anything that their kids are learning in school, which makes them more suspicious of things like critical race theory, because they sense that this is all just a way of giving people a certification, giving people a credential that they can use to enter into the system, which these people have never really been a part of because they don't have the fucking, undergraduate, graduate degree, right? And so they're like, you know what? My suspicion is that this is all bullshit and that you have some ulterior motive to begin with. Like, teachers have an ulterior motive. The system has an ulterior motive for these kids to begin with. I think that feeds into some of the suspicion about CRT and things like that. But just like generally, even if you look at the age breakdowns, like 18 to 29-year-olds, very, very close. older
Well,
people
well,
went for
that's
Youngkin. The
something I want
people
to.
who the only age demo that McAuliffe won, I'm embarrassed to say, is my age demo, the 30 to 44, which when you think about it, it makes total sense. If you crunch these numbers, age 30 to 34, college degree, starting to pay off some debt, maybe you just bought a house, maybe you just bought a car, maybe you're feeling like you're winning a little bit, you feel like things are working a little bit, you know, you want to maybe invest in the system a bit more. But most people don't feel that. And that reflects in the exit polls. And the fact that you had, women 68-31 without a college degree, that shows you we could talk about racial divides, we could talk about all kinds of things, whether education, stuff like that. It shows you that the main determinative factor is that the people who are skeptical of the system are now voting Republican. And that
Right.
used to be
Well, that
something
makes
that
sense.
lefties used to do. That used to be something on the
Right.
left. The lefties were the
Right.
skeptics, and it was the squares who voted red. And that's
Hmm.
just completely turned on a dime. And that has a
Right.
lot to do with our second topic of the evening, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. But go ahead. I'll let you talk about
Well,
that a bit.
if you remember, I wrote an article a while ago about Gen Z because I became fascinated through my socialist day trading world with what was going on Wall Street Bets and Reddit, and that kind of led me into really investigating some of what's going on with that generation. And I don't want to read too much into the results of one poll in one state, but this could be the statistics around Gen Z that I cited in that article beginning to manifest in elections because essentially people who have the research has shown they're like nihilistic libertarians. Like they're very skeptical of political correctness. They don't believe in the government because it's never worked in their lifetime, right? They've never seen a government work. Um, they're unusually frugal and industrious. Like a crazy percentage had like after school jobs by the time they were 10. It was something like 24%. So this might be, you're starting to see that play out because that sounds like people who are going to vote Republican. And if you look at a lot of, see, they keep all of this out of the mainstream narrative, and they take all these people and they say, "Oh, they're on 4chan, they're right wingers, they're not fucking right wingers. They're nihilists. They're nihilists. They think you're ridiculous. They think you're absurd." When you sit there with your whole Manichean worldview of good and evil and all of that, they just don't buy it. They see right through it. And this could be a first manifestation of that. Like people with that worldview, as things are now, are going to go towards the side that gets the joke when they start chanting, "Let's go, Brandon." They're not going
Right.
to go towards the
Exactly.
self-serious, censorious Democrats.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe wherever you saw it, on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Facebook. We have channels on all three of those platforms. Also, consider helping us create more content by becoming a member at patreon.com/do dissidents, or on Facebook, where you can become a supporter right through our Facebook page and get bonus content every week, as well as call-in access to our live stream shows. Thank you very much for your continued support.